Welcome to the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. It's that time of the year where there's lots of dirt around the place, lots of cut roots, seem to make a hell of a mess, clean up the mess, then make more mess, and just repeat the cycle endlessly until the end of the repotting season. So I thought I'd stick in this podcast with the repotting theme and a few more different parts that we've got to talk about, we've got to cover off. We've talked about root rot recently, we've talked about making changes with soil mix and all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to talk about the importance of securing your bonsai in your pot and go through the reasons, technical reasons as to why that's the case, and also talk about some methodology that I use or that can be used to do this. So really it's one of these finer points when it comes to bonsai. There's lots of big picture issues. There's lots of different stories that'll be told about repotting over the next 3 or 4 weeks. I think I'm going to stick with this same theme because it's now the time that if you're in the part of the world where repotting is a priority now, being that this is coming out early August, which is the second month for my repotting, but for a lot of people it may be the first month of repotting for your trees. So this should hopefully be relevant and make you think, maybe hopefully make you investigate and change a few things that you're doing, all for the good of your bonsai, for the betterment of your bonsai. It's the ability for our trees to continually take steps forward through advancement, but also by really good bonsai practices that we use, whether it's maintenance, whether it's the care that we do for them, whether it's something really serious that we do on a regular basis with our bonsai, like repotting, then by doing it slightly differently or maybe slightly more improved on whatever your technique is at the moment, and understanding why you're doing it and why we put so much effort into repotting our trees accurately can make a massive difference to your trees, which therefore ultimately leads to greater satisfaction for you. There's nothing worse than your tree taking a setback or for results maybe to not be what you expected them to be, which often can happen from poor technique. You might be blaming tree health, you might be looking at your fertilizing regime, you could be blaming the weather, you could be looking at so many different factors where it could be something really simple and fixable, like how your bonsai is secured into the container that you've chosen to put the tree into. So I want to talk about the importance of securing your tree and also talk about the technique. So let's get into it. When you start the repotting process, first step you do is take the tree out of the pot. Now, depending on the soil mix and length of time it's been in the pot, so many other different factors, the tree and the root system should be fairly well stuck into that pot. And that's why we use a root sickle to remove the tree, because the bond between the tree's root system and the pot, the container, is quite fierce. It's been, if you bought a black pot with a large tree from a nursery or something like that that's been there for a long time, it's a bit of a nightmare to actually get the tree out, because that root system starts to swell. It starts to take all available space that it's got and push towards the edges. And this is why if you have a pot of substandard quality, you'll find that over time your pot can break. The pressure from the root system slowly increasing and multiplying year upon year upon year can result in a pot breaking. Had exactly the same thing happen to me on a beautiful white pine and a very nice pot this year, which hadn't been repotted, I think, for about 4 years, and the root system had just popped the pot. So that happens, but that compression or that expansion of the root system, compressing the available space that it's got, can be quite severe. So when you go to repot, you're actually looking to break apart that root system, go from one of a better term, a brick, down to a fluffy, spongy type of root system, which will readily accept water and have the air-water transfer happening inside that system. So the watering of the tree gets a lot easier. You're also creating, by cutting back the root system by, say, 20-25%, all around the root system and underneath, you're creating extra area for that root system to grow into, to develop. Right? So we're creating this space inside the container that we're using for our tree. When the tree starts to come out of dormancy, and there's a future podcast coming up that's going to be talking about timing for repotting and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to get into that today. But when the tree comes out of dormancy and starts to wake up and release the stored resources that it's got, the first thing it's going to start doing is growing these new fine feeder roots, which will then have the uptake of the water and nutrients for the tree to develop, to continue to grow. And then it'll start pushing out the foliage. All right, so that's where you'll see, if you take the tree out of the pot at the right time, you may not see any bud movement above the soil, but below the soil, you'll look at it and go, oh, there's actually quite a few new white roots that have started to form. And if you've ever repotted any bonsai, then you will have seen these white roots. The older roots that have hardened off, for want of a better term again, that are a little bit older are that browny colour, but the new ones are that white colour. And if you get those new roots, you can find that they break extremely easily. Like just a slight bend on them and they'll snap the tip off. And this is the problem when your bonsai isn't secured appropriately inside the pot, the container. Now, I say container because it could be a slab of stone. It could be anything that it gets put into. It could be back into a black growing pot. It could be an orchid pot. It could be a proper bonsai pot, whatever it is. Whatever you choose to put your tree into at any stage of development, and I mean this, any stage of development, look at some kind of securing process, because the damage to those new fine roots occurs. It doesn't not happen to young trees, and I see it all the time, and you'll know it too. If you've ever grown anything young and you've just chucked them into a pot and you walk out and the wind's blown and they're blown over in the pot and you've got to chuck them back in there, put some more dirt or soil on top of them to hold them in place, and then hopefully they get going. So this issue that we get with any kind of movement in the trees can do some serious damage to that new, vulnerable, fragile root system that's starting to grow at the end of dormancy. They're growing into the spring period. Securing the tree in the pot allows for that root system to continue growing unhindered without any movement. It's like if you get a garden tree and you chuck it in the ground, more often than not, you'll put a stake against it, or you'll have seen, if you haven't done it yourself, you'll see that there's stakes in the ground with, maybe 3 stakes at different points around, creating a triangle with some kind of tying mechanism around the trunk to pull it back to the stake. Now, that is there 100% to stop any kind of movement in the tree, which then damages that new root system that started to grow. Just throw anything into the ground and hope for the best is going to lead to some kind of an issue with regard to that root system. And the tree will push resources into that root system as a priority above anything that's going to be happening above the ground. So with our bonsai, we want that future development. We have our plans in place. I love a plan. Well, those plans are in place based on everything working correctly. And when I say everything, I mean that root system has got to be able to support whatever is happening above the soil. Now, I'm not a great believer in, I don't do it, and I don't think you should. I don't want you reducing down the foliage mass in balance with the reduction of the root system that we do when we repot. Otherwise, you'd never get an advanced tree. So if you're taking off, I'll pick a figure, 20% of the existing root system, it would be crazy to think that you've got to remove 20% of the foliage mass to support it as well. So what you've got to do is you've got to make sure that when you put the tree into the pot, secure it correctly, give it its mandatory care period of 2 to 3 weeks after repotting to allow the tree to catch its breath, produce those new roots before you put into a situation where the tree's root system is expected to work really hard in a condition, in an environment that may not be ideal for it, out in the sun, in the wind, in the elements, basically, pushing up nutrients and water to the foliage mass when really it just wants to do its own thing. It just wants to grow for a little bit more before it's put under pressure. So that securing of the root ball means that those new roots can continue to grow at a rate that'll be accelerated. All right. So if you find that all of a sudden you haven't tied your tree in properly, and the tree there's any kind of movement of the tree in the pot whatsoever, which is going to be shown when there's wind. You might do it yourself by hand, but if there's any kind of wind that your bonsai is put into, it's going to be moving the tree, which is going to be breaking those new fine roots. Then what will happen is your new growth that will come around may not be quite as lush or as good as what it should be, because when the tree starts getting those roots damaged, it's going to pull resources that would have normally gone to foliage and suddenly push it downstairs to the root system. And normally what happens with your trees is what happens above happens below. So as you get new foliage growth, you get new root growth. As you get new root growth, you get new foliage growth. So it can support itself. The tree won't do anything that's going to put itself at risk or become vulnerable by pushing all this new foliage that suddenly its root system can't feed, and then put it in a position where the tree may be far more exposed to issues and dieback than what it should have been. So if you do look at your trees and you suddenly look and go, their growth hasn't been really good this year. I've done everything. I've used a good soil mix. I've checked there's no root rot. I've been fertilising. I've been watering. It's in a lovely sunny spot. And suddenly you find that there's movement in the tree in the pot. I'd almost guarantee you that movement is what's caused the issue in regards to the lack of foliage growth. Or maybe, depending on the variety of the species, of course, that we're dealing with, you might find that some of the foliage starts to look a funny colour. It starts to lose its vigour and starts to go a duller colour. Especially junipers come to mind when I think of this. A lot of them, really when there's an issue with that root system not being secured correctly, I find that, sometimes you start chasing your tail thinking, it's a fungal issue, it's this, it's that, it's whatever, when really it's probably just one of those 1%ers, just maybe the tie-in wires weren't done quite appropriately for the tree, and maybe it was rushed. Therefore, the new root system is not grown that should have grown to support the foliage. So therefore, the tree says, okay, well, I'm going to take it from here. I'm going to take it from there. I'm going to work on my root system. It's the most important part that the tree has is the root system. It knows that the energy or the engine of the tree, the thing that's really going to push new growth and keep it surviving for a very long period of time, comes below the soil surface. So that insurance policy that we put in place with those tie-in wires to make sure that nothing moves, nothing breaks, it's extremely important. I don't mind you having in your head an image of when we repot, it's a step backwards. That's okay, because it is. We're sort of cutting a bit of the root system off, but we're more invigorating, we're rejuvenating the root system as opposed to doing damage to it. We're not hacking it back, just going, it won't fit in the pot, so I'm going to cut it back and whatever. We're freeing it up so water gets into those inner areas. We're making sure that the tree can have new area to push new roots, which are the ones that are providing the water and nutrients, as I said earlier. So we're really ensuring the tree can continue to expand and grow. So the tying in is ensuring that we might take that one step backwards, but we take 2 steps forward. What we don't want is to suddenly take 2 steps backwards and that's it. We're not going forward at all for a very long period of time. As the tree gets into the pot for a longer period and those roots become established and the soil medium that we've put in there suddenly starts to become full of new root system and it starts to secure itself and hold itself into the pot, and that bond really starts to take, the tie-in wire becomes less important. And that's where I'll look at those tie-in wires and go, you've done your job, the pot's nice and the tree's nice and secure in the pot, there's no movement. So therefore, if rather than leaving a tie-in wire that maybe looks a bit ugly on the surface of some pretty nice roots, I'll cut the tie-in wire once it's done its job. The tie-in wires are also great that if the tree gets blown over and the pot breaks, well then that tie-in wire holds the root mass together quite nicely to ensure that we can then tape it up temporarily until we can get to the next repotting season. So be careful about the removal of those tie-in wires, but they're not absolutely essential like they are for that first, let's say, 12-month period after the repotting has occurred for the tree. You need to make sure that those new roots get well and truly locked in, that the tree can suddenly take off in spring and support the new foliage that you're wanting it to grow by going through the process of repotting and rejuvenation. So I want to talk next about the methodology for tying in your trees. All bonsai pots should have holes in the bottom of them. I say should because sometimes I've seen trees turn up that like a pond basket that basically hold all the water in, and the trees don't do extremely well. But we have holes in the bottom of our pots for multiple reasons. One is that air-water transfer that we've talked about with the root rot podcast last week. So it is super important to get the water into the tree, but also to get it away from the tree. The other thing that it's super important for is for your tie-in wires. Now, these tie-in wires, I always use aluminium wire, and I'll explain why I don't use anything else. I've seen steel used, I've seen galvanized steel, I've seen copper get used, and they're all too hard. They all are something which cannot give when the root system starts to grow. So by give, I mean stretch and break. Ultimately, with your tie-in wires, because I do strongly recommend that you put those tie-in wires on extremely tight and they're going over the root system. As that root system starts to lift and pull, what's going to happen is those tie-in wires are going to start to break. Now, putting the tie-in wires over the root system, I've never, ever, ever, ever had any kind of negative impact of that wire being across the root system. I've seen a lot of negative impact of the wire not being tight enough. So when I bring these issues up on the podcast, it's really common not to tighten those tie-in wires enough. So very simple, a really simple, basic way of tying your trees. Always, where possible, if there's enough room in the root system, use 2 wires, which creates 4 bits of wire coming up out of the root system. If you tie in one will be enough to secure one half of the root system, either the front or the back, let's say, or the right or the left side, whichever way you want to look at it. So one side of the root system will be tied in if there's one piece of wire that comes together and joins. Having 2 wires in there as a minimum means that you can have them, let's say, in a really basic format. You just join the tips of each wire together. So you've got 2 tie-in wires that come together. So front gets a nice bit of wire twisted across the front of it, and the back gets a nice bit of wire twisted across the back of it. That's a really basic, fundamental system that can get used to tie in your trees. Not something that I use. I'm going to explain a 4-way tie-in soon, which I've done before, but I want to run through it again because it seems to be one that I get asked about a lot. So they're very simple, 2 tie-in wires, really simple. Grab those wires, twist them together, get a pair of pliers, pull them, take the slack out of the wire as much as you possibly can, and then just twist them away. Don't over twist it. You'll find that when you're twisting aluminium wire, there's a break point with it. So the size wire that I'll use will either be a 2mm wire for smaller trees or 2.5mm for almost every other tree that I use when I do tie-ins. But as you're tying that wire, if you just keep an eye on it, don't do it by feel. But when you're twisting that wire, you'll see the wire at the twist point, especially closest to the soil, you'll find that it starts going white just before it's going to break. So it starts to stretch and there's no more uptake of the slack and it snaps. And it pretty much does it without any warning. So just keep an eye on that. You also notice that you get a feel in your hands after quite a while. You'll get to feel the wire when it starts to go a bit softer. The turn goes from being having a bit of resistance on it to suddenly there's nothing, and then next thing you know, half a turn later, it's snapped. When you are using your pliers, another tip for you as well, just make sure the tip of the pliers doesn't go down any further than where the 2 wires cross over. So if you imagine an X being made by the 2 wires when they cross over, you want your wires in the top V of that X and the tip not to go any lower. If the tip of your pliers goes lower than where those 2 wires intersect, when you turn it, the tip of your pliers can be quite sharp and it will actually cut that wire. You may not see it immediately, but as you're turning and you put pressure onto that wire, then you'll start to snap the wire. So don't over tighten them. Make sure that you don't push your pliers down too far past that where the two wires intersect when you start turning. So that 2-wire method, it's like I said, it's the best of the bunch until you can come up with a better method. All right, it's far better than doing nothing. It's far better than using twine or hooking over the root system and pulling it back out through the bottom of the pot. It's, coming up through the bottom of the pot, sit the tree onto the base soil, drainage layer, mound, whatever it is you've got, then tie in those tie-in wires, then add the substrate, the potting mix or the soil mix that you're going to be using for your tree, and then work it in with a chopstick. That's a really simple way. So what I want to talk about is the 4-way tie-in, and this is by far the most efficient way that I have absolutely ever come across in my entire bonsai life for securing in trees. And it's easy, but it's like anything, it takes practice. So don't rush it. You're better off practicing this over and over and over. I've practiced it myself many times with a pot with a piece of timber in the middle that's cut to be about the size of a root ball, and I've practiced and practiced and practiced till I've got it right. And now it's like riding a bike; it becomes second nature for every time that I put in the tie-in wires. So I'll just explain it to you. There can be, ideally, you want 4 holes at opposite corners in the pot, but even if there's only 2 that are opposite each other in the center of the pot, it still works. It's still by far the best way of holding the tree into the pot. So you have 2 wires again, same as and that's what I mean. You're not using any more wire by doing the 4-way tie-in. It's just a far better method. The ultimate aim with it is to create a rectangle size wire that's going to go around the outside of the nabari over the top of the finer root system that pulls down evenly around the entirety of the tree. So rather than going across the center of the nabari, which is what those individual tie-in wires will do, which looks ugly, the 4-way tie-in sits out a little bit further and runs around the periphery of the nabari. Therefore, it sits below the soil level, which means that you are not going to see it, which makes it perfect. So your tree's tied in really securely by this outside clamp that holds the tree in place. It's also something that you don't see, so it's win-win. It's a small detail, and it's worth definitely practicing. So you push your 4 wires, your 2 wires comes up to 4 tips of wire coming up through the pot. Now, if you have those sitting up, like, use your thumb and pointer finger on both hands, so they're sort of sitting up like a U opposite each other. Label them 1, 2, 3, and 4. So go around in a circle, label them 1, 2, 3, and 4. So wire number 1 folds across to wire number 2. Number 2 wire does not move. It stays in the vertical position. But wire number 1 comes across to number 2. So at that point where wire number 2 is, you take your pliers, pull the slack out of wire 1, spin the pliers around, say, 6 times, something like that, 5 or 6 times, just to create tension on the wire. And so number 2 wire is in its original position, hasn't moved. So then you take wire number 2 across to wire number 3. All right, so then you pull the slack out of wire number 2. Again, wire number 3 hasn't moved. It stayed in that vertical position. So wire number 2 gets into horizontal position, the slack gets pulled out of it towards wire number 3, and where that junction is at wire number 3, make a cross with those wires, grab it with your pliers, turn it 4, 5, 6 times, whatever it is, take the slack out of the wire, and then, so by this stage you'll notice that wire number 1, there's a bit of a dag hanging off where wire number 2 was. Wire number 2's gone across to wire number 3. There's a bit of a dag, an excess part of number 2 wire still there. That's fine. We'll deal with that later. So then wire number 3 that's still vertical at this stage, you draw that across to wire number 4, okay? Pull the slack out of the wire, where it comes into contact with wire number 4. So number 4 wire is still vertical at this stage. You cross over those wires, twist them around 5 or 6 times. All right, so now we've effectively used every piece of wire that was standing up in the pot. We've still got to join to do the final link across the back section or one of the sections where wire 4 number has to come across towards wire number 1. So get your wire cutters, go through, cut off all those extra dags, those extra bit of wire that are hanging around the pot now. So it leaves, you can start to see that this is making a really nice clamp on the outer periphery of the root system. So then take another piece, cut another piece of the wire, let's say half the length of the wire number 4 that's standing up in the air. Then you take that wire, we're going to call that wire number 5, all right, this new piece of wire. Where number 1 wire comes up over the root system where it first started, hook this wire number 5 under that wire, make a little loop at the bottom of it and twist it. So you're effectively joining wire number 5 to where number 1 started. Now, then you take wire number 4 and number 5 into the middle section of the root ball, right? So rather than 4 coming right the way across to where 5 starts, join those 2 in the middle. Pull the slack with the pliers where they cross over. Take up the slack by twisting. You'll find that this could be quite a few turns that you have to do when you pull it, but this final joining of wire number 5 and number 4 together, that's when the whole system starts to pull the clamp down. You take up all possible slack that's floating around with all the wires that you've got sitting up through the pot, and the clamp starts to work. Then when you've got the tree nice and secure, you should be able to grab that tree by the trunk, give it a bit of a wiggle, and see zero movement whatsoever. If you've done that, you've done it absolutely correctly. And I know it's very hard to visualize when you're hearing me talk about it. But so if you ever see me around the place and you want me to explain it, then please grab me. If you have grabbed me, then hopefully I've helped you with it so far. But it's really that joining of wire number 5 and combining into the center, then pulling out the slack and tightening that wire up again. That's what really makes this whole system work. And it's beautiful because then, like I said before, you put the soil into the pot, basically holds everything together and makes it that the root system, there's zero movement for the tree, for those new roots, those new fine feeder roots, and it means that there's not going to be any damaged root system. There's not going to be any open wounds where things can go wrong. It means that the tree can take up the water, take up the nutrients. It can push new growth. It can feed itself. It can keep taking those steps forward. If the 4-way tie-in is confusing and you think, I'm not going to do it, it's too hard, I get it. I do. I completely do. Plan on working towards it. If you're neck deep in repotting now and you haven't done it, no problem. But I'd strongly suggest just going back to each of the trees that you've repotted, giving that trunk a little bit of a wobble now before it gets too far into the growing period. And if there's any movement, you've got to fix it. You have to fix it. If I have a tree come into the workshop and I see that there's any movement, I don't care what time of the year it is, and there is significant trunk movement on that tree, then I know that the tree is in a position where it's not taking steps forward. It's just managing this new root growth so it can survive. It's treading water. It's running on the spot. It's really doing nothing. It's not going forward because it doesn't have the root system to support itself. The first thing that I'll do is look to push some new wire up through the bottom of that pot and tie the tree in correctly, or as securely as I possibly can. It may not be a 4-way tie. It might be one of those single crossover wires that I twist as hard as I possibly can, but I know that that's at least going to have a positive impact on the tree to make sure that it's able to grow the feeder roots that it needs to survive. So while I said 4-way tie-in might be the ultimate, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go for it now. Learn the technique, study it, make sure that you get it right, and I guarantee you that the tree will come out of repotting like it never has before. And it could be like if you look historically at repotting, then when trees haven't done well from repotting, and repotting comes one of those things that you're scared of and you're worried about, it can be something as simple as how the trees are tied in or not tied in the pots that makes the big difference. It's such an important component, and I called it a 1%er before. It's really not a 1%er. It's almost the make or break of successful repotting of your trees. And the issues that you see in summer where you get leaf burn or dieback in autumn the following year, a lot of that can be attributed to how the tree is secured into the pot, because securing in the pot sounds, it doesn't sound like much, but it affects the root system. When the root system gets affected, what happens below happens above. There's got to be a cost factor to that. So, you can have the best soil in the world. You can have a $1 million pot. You can have a $10 million bonsai, but not securing the tree in the pot appropriately can really set everything back. So it's something to really work on, hone the skills on it, get it right, and I promise it's something that'll stick with you for the rest of your bonsai life, and it'll just be one less thing to worry about with your trees. Alright, so just to wrap everything up and put a nice little bow on it for everybody, use aluminium wire when you're tying in trees. 2 tie-in wires where possible. I don't think you need more than that, but 2 tie-in wires works great. There are different techniques too. Like, let's say you've got a round pot and there's only 3 holes in there. You still use the 2 tie-in wires. Obviously, two wires will come up through one hole and then individual wires in the others. So where the 2 wires have come up together in the hole, they're basically wire 1 and wire 2. So, and then you've got 3 and 4 in the individual holes. So wire 1 goes to, say, wire 3, wire 2 goes to wire 4, and then 3 and 4 come together across the front. So it sort of creates like a triangle tie-in for the trees. It's really, really thorough. So, of course, there's different scenarios when you've got single holes, what to do there, and there's all different techniques with different pots that we've got. But where possible, the main takeaway is secure your tree appropriately in the pot. Avoid any kind of movement with the tree, especially within the first 12 months of the tree being repotted. After that, things ease up a little bit. And if you're worried about wire scarring on the burry, which is a real thing, then you can always put a little bit of padding, a bit of bicycle inner tube or a bit of rubber or a bit of even pot mesh, something like that, over the top of that nabari when you do tie it in quite firmly. The 4-way tie-in pushes everything away from the center of the tree and provides that nice outside clamp to hold the tree securely long term and avoid any kind of issues. And we talked about root rot. Maybe this is one of the things that needs to be considered as well, is how well the tree's tied in, because that constant damage and breaking of roots really leaves the tree vulnerable to something getting into its root system and some kind of fungal issue causing problems with the tree. It's a simple thing. You should be listening to this hopefully going, yep, got it all done, and what a waste of a podcast. But if not, then aim for it, work towards it, because I guarantee you it's going to be something that you're going to enjoy, because your trees just take massive steps forward with it. Anyway, thank you for listening in. I do appreciate it. And like I said, the next few episodes of the podcast are going to have that real repotting focus on it. And the next one might even have a story about a tree that I've just worked on recently, a Chinese quince that was given the once over from me being too scared, hesitant to do something, and worried about what I'm going to do. I know I make it sound easy on the podcast. Just cut that off. Do this, do that. But yeah, I'm exactly the same as you. I have hesitations, and for a tree that you can tell I'm smiling about it now, so I've already done it. It's not something I'm about to do. It's something I've been through with the tree, where I've made some significant changes that I've looked at for years, 5 years, I reckon, maybe longer. And I've finally done it, and it's worked, and I feel great. So I'll talk about that in the next episode of the podcast. Until then, give your trees a big cuddle for me, and happy bonsai.